moments in the book where I worry for Kenya. I worry about the Cyber Crimes Act. I worry about the intimidation of journalists, the arrests of journalists, that crazy phrase that is now, that has been struck down by a high court judge, and that's Justice Mumbi, called misuse of a gadget, right? Misuse of a gadget is a really funky phrase, if you can put it that way. I often wonder whether there should be another one, and I hope whoever drafted the first one is not listening, that should be misuse of a press conference, misuse of a book launch, right? Misuse of a book even, and definitely the one called misuse of a tweet, right? But I think for me, the most important thing about the book is really a call to create a country that is open, that is democratically safe for everybody to be able to express themselves and ourselves. So I think for me that is really kind of the comment around freedom of expression. I'm going to turn to John Allan Namu, and I'm going to read a section that came from an interview that we had, I think, in 2016, which seems like 2 lifetimes ago. Actually, all of my grandchildren were not born by then, so it's really several lives ago. And the section of the book reads like this: investigative journalism is mostly unglamorous, but it is heady when the story breaks. It is important to remember that story is not about you. It is only important if it changes the lives of people and it stops harmful state behavior. And lastly, it opens up public dialogue. And this is direct quote from John Allan. When did you realize that your reporting mattered, and what story did that for you, John?
I think, all journalists have various moments when they realize that the work that they do is bigger than them. But if I'm honest, and I think that's why we are here,
completely authentic,
to be honest.
And you can share your M-Pesa number at the same time.
Sorry. Was 2007, 2008. In that period, my colleagues and I had covered everything from the putting down of the Mwangi in central Kenya and in various parts of urban Kenya. The start of a very, very serious problem, at least the re-emergence of that problem, which is extrajudicial executions, specifically of young men. And then being thrown into a moment of civil unrest and covering it alongside all other journalists. For the first time, you're seeing your country burning. And every word that you use, every word that you speak on television, every person that you choose to interview and make part of your story matters, because it's being watched with very keen attention. Everybody's attention is on what's going to happen with the country. And journalism was the expression of that. So for me, that's the first time that I really, it became very clear that anything I do and all the stories that I choose to pursue can have a very, very huge outsized impact than what I just think about, when I'm going to press with that. 2007, and you mentioned it in portions of your book, was a pivotal moment for this country, and living through it, seeing what happened on the ground, and reporting about the fraying of a country was I think one of the most important parts of my career. Yeah,
that's great. And maybe if I can, just a follow-up question, where do you see the future of investigative journalism going?
That's
What's the next frontier?
That's an interesting question. It's something we were considering recently with some colleagues. There's an expression that was used in a presentation that was made in a class that I'm in, and it's that journalism is becoming more and more divorced from the news. And what that means is that we no longer consider everything that goes into the news as journalism. And there's often, I think that the term is interlopers, who are using their voice and their experience and their knowledge to be able to create, journalistic pieces of work. And I think the same goes for investigative reporting. So to give an example, something that you're involved in as well, Missing Voices, the website started as part of an initiative by a number of civil society actors, right? But what it has become is a resource for journalism, and in fact, a very deep tool for for research into extrajudicial executions. But it wasn't created by journalists. That's the direction I think that we're going into, that there'll be various subsets of people with knowledge and experience that can inform investigative reporting, produce investigative reporting, and sort of contribute to the entire ecosystem. I think that the appreciation for in-depth analytical reporting is growing every day, because of the infodemic that we have with fake news and what have you, but also because of the times that we live in. It's important to people to have information that they can use, as opposed to just almost like fast food news that you watch and an hour later it's gone. So that's the direction that I think that is going into.
That's great. So analytical. What I hear is analytical content that you trust, and I think that's great. Let me turn to Yusuf, and this could be a revelation for many of you. You were once a journalist. You probably still are a journalist at heart. What strikes you with the the long view that you have of journalism and political economy and other issues in terms of this last decade? What are the 2 or 3 significant shifts over the last decade that you've seen in the way that Kenyans express themselves?
Well, yes, thanks. I was a journalist, and in fact,
so it's confirmed.
In some ways, yes. I started journalism when obviously several of the people here were not born.
Yeah. That's a compliment for some of us.
At the national
God bless you, sir.
At the National Radio and Television, which was a state-run organization, under the controlled legislation of the then ruling party, KANU. So it wasn't really the journalism that we're used to at the moment. And then I left and I went to work at the BBC, where I had to undergo a complete change of mindset and become a proper journalist, a critical journalist who can express himself openly. I must say that I wanted to just go back a little bit to the Kenya project. And my feeling is that Kenya is an artificial, fragile colonial project. And from the very beginning, it was never intended to be an independent democratic republic. And all its institutions, all its legislations were built to serve the empire in some ways. And what happened in 1963, which was the most significant development for many years of independence, was that the then leader, who was elected by the Kenyan people, moved into the governor's house and became a black governor, ruling by the same legislations that was put into place by the British. And I remember as a very young person, that my family was the first victim of this colonial policy. A member of my family was the first person to be detained without trial in November 1963. And then we had the conflict in northern Kenya, which was presented as a matter of life and death for the new republic, in which all the rules were thrown out of the window, and we had a state of an emergency. So then we fast forward to this last decade. After many years of struggle, we first of all got the right of association. There was a change in the constitution where some of us who were in exile were able to come back and participate in the political process, because multipartyism and freedom of association and freedom of the press and formation of political parties was legalized. Right. And then the second most important thing for me was the 2010 constitution, This was a game changer in the sense that for the first time, the Kenyan people themselves came together to create a constitution that the type of constitution that they wanted, which had checks and balances, in particular the Bill of Rights, which entrenched basic democratic human rights and democratic rights that did not exist before. And then we have had this explosion, this wave of freedom, media freedom, political freedoms, freedoms that you could only dream of before, because I remember in the 70s, before I went into exile, there was this culture of impunity that the then Attorney General of the country, Charles Njonjo, stood up to make that ridiculous declaration that even imagining the death of the president is a penalty punishable by death. You cannot even imagine or think about the death of the president. We had reached a position whereby, in fact, according to the joke of one of the Indonesian activists who later became the president of Indonesia, Abdul Wahid, famous joke that in Indonesia you could not open your mouth. If you had a toothache, you had to go to Singapore to open your mouth. So we couldn't open our mouth, and many of us went into exile as a result of that for many, many years. And I can tell you the culture of repression that existed in this country continued to live with us when we were in exile. For example, I remember one evening in London, we were doing a campaign. We were going to launch a political campaign against the Kenyan regime. And we were doing posters and banners. We're sticking them out into the streets. And we were with Ngugi wa Thiong'o, the Kenyan writer and political activist. And as we were doing our work, policemen, British policemen, uniform policemen, came to look at what we were doing. And many of us started running away because we associated the police with repression.
You were waiting for the truncheons, the tear gas,
and
the GSU.
So they politely talked to us, and I said, what are you doing? And we said, we are doing banners and posters. We have a campaign tomorrow. And they just walked past us and left. So I think that is what you remember, the police, that our judiciary was repressive and corrupt, our bureaucratic system. And so up to now, I think we haven't fixed our system yet as a country. And that's why 2007 and 2008 happened. You know, because I thought we were already a nation in the making. Right. But we're just a mishmash of people. We have not really become Kenyan. And that's why I was shocked in my own neighborhood. People were killing each other because the other person was of a different ethnic group. I never thought that after all these years of growing together as Kenyans, as young Kenyans. But of course, the result of that terrible event is the fact that we have a fantastic constitution that has entrenched our right to be able to express and be in place like here, to be able to talk about our problems openly without any fear. Because I don't think you took a permit today to be able to
No, I didn't.
In the old days, a meeting of more than five people was considered illegal unless you had a permit from the chief. Right. So we've come a long way.
I mean, actually, if we had been publishing this in, I guess, 1986, many of us would have been in the men's toilet, hiding, as a group of people did get arrested once, 26 of them in a men's toilet, reading a pamphlet that I think probably Yusuf authored or edited at some point. But no, I think it's a great point. Just a personal note that, you know, my mother, Brenda Houghton, who's in the acknowledgement, she was actually deported with 7 hours notice for writing an article in the, I believe it was the Telegraph, where she actually interviewed a politician on, I think it was Mwikali actually, that, and she asked him what would happen if President Kenyatta died. And these officers showed up at the house, true story, and she was given 7 or 8 hours to leave. So she left with my youngest daughter, my youngest sister, her daughter. And as a journalist, she was persona non grata for many, many years. And this is just a personal twist to your comment. So I'm told we're live now on YouTube and Facebook. So let me invite those of you who are watching us from wherever they are, whether they're in Kisumu, Mombasa, Nakuru, or Texas. There are a few people who asked for a live stream. Welcome this morning to the first of 4 sessions. This session is called Stay Expressed. And we are tweeting and posting at hashtag Dialogue and Dissent and hashtag Madaraka Day 2021. I'm going to invite questions and comments from those of you who are here with us physically. You just have to project your voice. Please keep your mask on, just to avoid an exodus of people running for the exit as you stand up and pronounce yourself. Let me see if there are any questions to either myself, Yusuf, or John before we come back to the panel. Let's see. Please keep the temptation to point out the editorial, the grammatical problem on page 65. Right, skip that part. Okay. Yes, at the back there, Renee.
Well, first of all, congratulations, Kahumbu, and thank you very much to the panelists, and good morning, everyone. I'm curious on that last statement that you made, Honorable Yusuf, on the experiment that is Kenya. What is it after 58 years that is missing that would enable us to get over our cultural and ethnic background and get to the point where we're actually Kenyan? If you think about it, I think that it's safe to say that there is no singular Kenyan that can claim that they're purely of one ethnic background without finding traces of another culture within their bloodline. And yet we attack one another. What's missing? And how do we fix it?
That's great. Let me take one more, and I'll, if you allow me, I'll summarize the question just for those people who are listening on live stream. I will not do justice to it, but I will try my best. Any other questions, comments? Yes, Jane.
Yeah, this is to all three of you, I suppose. The mention of 2007, of course, just brings back a lot of really horrific memories to all of us. One of the things that was, I guess, said about the whole thing is that it was one ethnic group completely against another. And yet, when you spoke with people that were running away or that were seeking places to hide their families, the story isn't so straightforward. And so I would love to see a collection of people's stories, their experiences, just put together so that we can see who we are. Because I think that we are not, as Renee has just said, there's no 100% this or 100% that. At that point, it was one ethnic group was cleansing getting rid of the other, and yet you find that people from that other were rescued and saved by members of Ouma. So I think it would be really great if there was a collective of stories of the humanness of Kenyans, because I think there's a lot of that.
Thank you very much. Let me take one more, and then we'll tackle these first set. Okay, good. Let's start off with us. So let me invite Honorable Yusuf Hassan, and I actually use the word honorable purposely in your context. I know you don't like it, but I still have it that you have honor and you bring honor to your work. The first question was really about the Kenya project. How do we ensure, how do we build a greater sense of ourselves as one rather than a collection of ethnicities and various identities? I don't know if you want to take that first, and then we'll come to the second question, which is really about the testimonies and how do we get those stories out from 2008. And we'll go to John and then come to myself.
I am particularly interested in the Kenya project because I consider myself to have come from the periphery. I mean, I'm considered to be a peripheral person. And during the colonial period, the community of my parents were considered non-indigenous, although we were in the box, the Kenyan colony box, and they didn't have, although they were here in Nairobi at a very early stage. They were never considered to be.
Yusuf, let me just ask you to back up a little bit, because I think there are a number of us under the age of 40 who will not understand the weight of that comment about we were part of the colony. What was the administration of the northeastern frontier like in a sentence or two?
Well, the Northern Frontier District was like a buffer zone. It was neither an integral part of the colony nor a separate part of it. It just was there to protect the white settler colonies from intrusion, maybe from Ethiopia or from Somalia. And it was under a state of emergency from the 1920s until the 1990s. And then, unfortunately, we had that conflict in 1963, where they were stigmatized, and every Kenyan knew that anyone from that remote part of the country was a shifter. You know, and even the conflict is known as the Shifter War. And they were regulated differently. For example, if I wanted to visit a relative in Garissa, you would need a permit to travel, like an internal passport to travel to that part of the country. And in 1963, places like Garissa were placed under a protection law in which you couldn't get in and out. The government called these were protected villages, where you were protecting the citizens from intruders. But in fact, this was a replication of the concentration camps that were established by the British during the war against the Kenyan liberation, the Kenyan Land and Freedom Army. The same practices, the same legislations were simply rolled over into an independent Kenyan territory. So I've always been interested how we could become, how we could create a different Kenya, another Kenya. And I was born in Nairobi. I grew up in Western Kenya. I have very little memories of Northern Kenya, where we were taken to do the madrasa, the Quran. You know, like nowadays a lot of the diaspora families bring back their children from the United States to culturalize. So for us, being taken to Northern Kenya was the same, you know, to get a bit of the language. The first language I spoke, of course, was Kiswahili. I came to learn Somali much later. And in fact, when I became politically active and I was campaigning to run for Nairobi, a lot of people said, "Oh, why are you running for Nairobi? Kwa nini usiende huko? Huko kwenu." And then I said, "But huko kwenu, where is this?" Because for me, Nairobi is my hometown. And to a certain extent, we got it wrong from the foundation. You know, the colonial system wanted, I mean, I have no problem with ethnicity. Having your language and your culture is very important. I'm very proud nowadays when I see a Kikuyu television station with Kikuyu drama, Kikuyu plays, Kikuyu discussions. It's not a scene, nor is it something wrong to be a Kikuyu or a Luo. Then I then from northern Kenya, I was in Kisumu. Again, my parents were business people in Kisumu. And I witnessed the 1969. The Kisumu today, where the president is holding Madaraka Day, was a no-go zone. They were labeled, they were profiled. And from northern Kenya, then we had the Nyanza problem, we had the Luo problem, the so-called ethnic problem. And one time I remember when I was at the BBC, a BBC journalist asked me, there was an analysis on the Kenyan situation. And he said, can you explain the rivalry between the Kikuyu and the Luos? And I looked at him and I said, there is no rivalry between the Kikuyus and the Luos. They live completely apart. One is in the lake and the one is in the mountain. Where is the rivalry? And he said, but you don't want to accept the reality of Kenya. You're ethnically divided tribal society. And I said, there's a conflict between one elite and another elite, but not between two Kenyan communities, is the point that I wanted to make. So we missed the point of creating nation building. In terms of national building, we've never had a leadership and a policy to bring our people together. Like, for example, when you go to Tanzania, Nyerere's philosophy of ujamaa, of bringing people together, has created a Tanzanianness. When you meet a Tanzanian, they will never ask you, "Weni kabila gani?" And until we're able to do that, we'll continue to be divided into these little boxes. But I see there's a lot of hope now. I see a lot of young people. The mixing is accelerating. Doing things together is accelerating. Marriages between communities is growing. I have a feeling that we would reach there sometimes. But I was hoping that it would happen in my lifetime. And even now, as I speak as a politician, I'm constantly pigeonholed. People want to know who I am. I don't, although I have, I consider maybe my parents were Somalis, but I have grown everywhere. I've lived everywhere. My family is mixed. I have friends from all the sides. People just want to say and identify me with where I come from, where my background is. They don't look at my thinking. They don't want to hear my thought. They simply say, but wewe ni hivi. But we need to change that. And I think our society is changing. If we continue on this path, I hope maybe in future we would have something we can call, this is the Kenyan nation. This is what represents Kenya. And I think also the system has used that.
Yeah.
For example, when there was trouble in northern Kenya, it was a northern Kenyan problem.
Yeah.
Kisumu, Nyanza, it's a Nyanza problem. It's not our problem. Now things are happening in Turkana. They'll tell you, inafanyika huko Turkana. Ani Turkana tu haina shida. But the same repressive policies that are implemented in Turkana, in northeastern, in Garissa, in Kisumu, eventually would come here to Korokocho, to Kibra, to Nairobi. Yeah. And you would feel it, because that man who has practiced locking up people and abusing his powers in Turkana would not say, is this not Kenya? We did it in Turkana, we can do it here.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think we have a long way to go, but I hope we can get there, and we would have a Kenyan nation one day that we can say, mimi ni Mkenya, and I'm proud of being Kenyan, rather than wewe ni kabila gani na umetoka wapi.
Yeah. No, thank you very much, Yusuf. I mean, I think one of the things that the book tries to communicate is the idea that national cohesion, justice, unity, peace. These are not destinations as such. They are essentially steps towards they're steps in a journey, right? So in many ways, I don't think your great grandchildren will somehow have a different experience in terms of the struggles that you've gone through, but hopefully it will be easier for them. And in the same way that it is easier for many of us now than it was in the 1970s and 1980s, it'll be easier in future. I wanted to read a section from the book that relates to, that speaks to the comment and the question that was raised by Jane earlier. And she asked the question of, could we get some testimonies of the post-election violence? And just to say that there are a number of great resources. I mean, Judy Kibinge's book, movie, Kimani Njogu's book, Healing of the Wounds, Twaweza, which is a series of testimonies available. And the section in the book here reproduces a chapter that I'd written for Kimani in the Healing of the Wound. I'm just going to read one paragraph. On the eve of the 2007 elections, and I'm reading from page 16, those of you who are used to reading along with the bishop. Okay, I'm going to get in trouble with that one, I'm sure. Bishop, I'm sorry I said that. On the eve of the 2007 elections, Kenya had a functioning government, a judiciary, no less than 6,000 non-governmental organizations, hundreds of thousands of community-based organizations, one of the most sophisticated mass media sector in the region, thousands of international organizations and corporations, including the headquarters of various UN agencies. Their collective silence that first week of January 2007 suggested that they had all left Kenya. We were about to be reminded of an important lesson. Organizations are only as effective as the individuals who work within them. In a time of profound upheaval, it is to individuals that we must look to catalyze and bring people and organizations together. And I then talk about the next 3 months of the work that a number of us did, including those of us, some of us in this room. John, what do you pull away from, what do you take as significant from the way we organized to respond to that moment? Like, what's relevant for today and the future?
That's a big question, because from where I sat, actually that first week was perhaps one of the most traumatizing, for me. Simply because, you put a lot of faith in the institutions that somehow, support this country that we call Kenya. And to see the absence of that, or to feel that absence, was really very, it was very traumatizing. And what I take from that moment, granted there were some positives, and there were people who really chose to minimize the importance of their ethnicities in that point in time, and actually be human and see one another as human. I mean, my mother is an example. We live in Limuru, and at the time that the upheavals were happening in Western Kenya, there are a lot of people who come to work on the tea farms in Limuru. And she went out, to try and give blankets, because these were our neighbors, right, with their children who we grew up next to. And in that moment when she was attempting to do that, she was met at the police station, the Tigoni police station, and she was told by people who are caddies and people who we knew, and she was told, Mama Wanja, don't support these, don't go and start giving aid to these people. These people are killing our people somewhere else. And if you don't listen, then we are going to come for your sons, Fortunately, her sons were somewhere in the city, working. But the point being that even in those dangerous moments, even in those dangerous times, there are people who chose, a different path. For me, 2007 is a reminder. 2007, 2008 is a reminder that this country that we have come to call Kenya really needs a lot of help, a lot of healing. It still does. But that the problems that confront us are not even about tribe. Tribe is an excuse, from my point of view. It is an excuse that is very conveniently used by people, especially powerful people, to be able to divide, to be able to dissect this country and use it for whatever purposes that they have. The reason why it's becoming less and less of a discussion is because I think there are more Kenyans, especially young Kenyans, who recognize that their tribes have never helped them anywhere they've gone, right? Saying that you are Kikuyu or you're a Luo or you're Turkana does not help you as much as saying that I had a cup of tea for breakfast this morning. It doesn't help, because it is not something that is, you can't, it's not a currency, right? In as much as people try and make you believe that it is a currency. The fundamental problems for me that I saw at that time and I still see today are that we have refused we've refused to build this country on the basis of equality, of justice, of advancement for everybody. It is advancement of the few at the expense of the many, unfortunately, from how I see it. And in as much as I think the Constitution is really one of those bright sparks or bright points in our history that allow us to reflect on how much work remains to be done, because it outlines the aspirations that we should live up to, and it brings them to life in a way that that hadn't existed before. I mean, in the moments that you've discussed in the 70s and in the 80s and throughout our history. What again for me is insidious is that where the special branch would come for people, and there would be laws that expressly say that you cannot do this and this and this. Now that kind of thinking has gone sort of like underground, because it's now taboo to express that kind of backward thinking. So now it has become sort of like the underlying tenet that drives some, action, especially at government level from time to time. And this reluctance to move forward, you see in various exchanges that the public has with the government. I'll give a small example. One of the biggest corruption scandals of recent times, I think, that people haven't really paid attention to is that of the managed equipment leasing scheme. Billions of shillings were expended to try and improve the healthcare of Kenyans across the country. The machines came, etc. But the way that contract was put together was without public participation. You could tell because there were decisions that were made even before legislators were involved in that process, right? But asking for information about that scheme, the contract, we talk about the SGR and what have you. The contract itself, the Ministry of Health has refused to release it completely, up until now. So legislators, parliamentarians can only guess at what is actually inside those contracts. I think the committees on health perhaps have had an opportunity to look at that. But how many other people have been able to do that? And that's the importance of access to information that is, in our laws, is that it gives you the ability to interact with information that can make your life better. But because these attitudes, these carryovers from the colonial times to more repressive times to today still exist within the mindset of how government operates, then the constitution becomes some sort of annoying reference point that you kind of have to work with, but you'd rather go around, right? I think in your book you referred to some cabinet ministers meeting, I think a day or a few days after the constitution was passed, saying that we will kill it. That attitude still exists and persists, and that's the attitude that needs to be removed for the constitution to really be fully expressed.
That's great. Let's open up, and those of you who heard the cappuccino machine in the background, yes, it is true, we have coffee coming later. That's just an advertisement break. Any questions, comments? Yes. This is a scary moment when somebody says to me, page 32, what did you write? Okay, excellent. We'll take that just after Spencer.
Okay. While the public may be content to chat along with Fela Kuti, this is a government of the greedy, by the greedy, for the greedy. The truth is, most of the middle class are also at it. A reprint of Michel Arong's 2009 book, Our Turn to It, might just find, rather than it is our time to eat, it might now be called We Are All Eating When We Can, and some are eating a lot more than others. Coming from a government institution, this cannot be said or put any better, because what we are learning is that most of us lack the opportunity. When the opportunity presents itself, you become worse than your predecessors. I've seen people profiled because of their ethnicity, and they've been deprived their right to living because they belong to a certain ethnic community. And I'd really love, to read this book, because as we are talking, I think we have a very good constitution, but again, the independence of the other arms of the government have been really abused by those in power to keep others out of their workplaces, or to repress, or to have them in detention. This is something that I've seen practically, and I've seen someone lose out for speaking the truth for public good, but they have been profiled, and the people in power have used the court process and abused it properly to make sure that they never get any other source of income. So, as much as we are saying we have a good constitution, well, it is there. But people, as Allan Namu has put it, the spirit of killing the constitutionalism is still there, well and kicking.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Let me take the second question, I think, or comment from YouTube.
So somebody asks, could you all talk about the trade union movement and its value today in building nationhood? In a separate conversation today on Twitter and Facebook, many of us have realized that we don't know any other trade unionists other than Atwoli and the teachers. To what extent could unions be working against the people?
Great. Is there a name? Is there a name to that? Say it again?
We'll get it.
Okay, thank you very much. So maybe I'll come back to John and Yusuf to respond. Funny, when Spencer spoke, I actually had pulled out a section from page 85, which was really a kind of just a love letter to all the Kenyan whistleblowers that we know, you know, and it's really one of the things that as a writer you can do is you can actually just give a spotlight to people who stand up for this country, regardless of all that, you know, Fela Kuti described in his song and Michaela Wrong has described in her books. And I started like this. I said, you know, Kenyan whistleblowers regularly challenge bribery, substandard public services, hate speech, domestic violence, the abuse of public resources, and the exclusion of all those in need. To do this, they must mute that internal childhood voice in all of us that says standing up is to be a telltale, to be a snitch, and to be a betrayer. But thankfully, the conditions that gave rise to the fear and the sycophancy of the 80s and the 90s are no longer with us. Citizens can no longer claim it is dangerous to have an independent mind. They cannot argue that our laws prohibit the freedom of expression and the right to association. Leaders are now required to bring honor, dignity, and public confidence to the office. Now, I felt it was important to write like this, right? To speak like this, because I think as you speak and write like this, you change the narrative that says corruption is normal, right? And that bizarre conversation that I had in Karen Country Club, which is a true story. In fact, it's only I haven't been able to find the person to ask their permission whether I could include their name in the book. But it is a true story, the tenderpreneur in the Karen Country Club. And I think the second thing that, you know, I wanted to just honor, you know, and if you don't mind, Spencer, let me just honor you very directly. Some of you may not have heard the weight of those names, those two names, if I can use a Kinglish way of describing. Spencer Sankale is one of the whistleblowers of the Mara University heist. 200 million shillings would have gone into the pockets of 3 or 4 people if 5 or 6 people had not come together to fight that corruption scandal, right? He continues to be an accountant at the university. And, you know, I am prouder for knowing you for that. Let me turn to, let's go to John Allan first. There's a question on trade unions. Where are they? There's a question on whistleblowers. Feel free to be frank. And if you want to mention Dick Gardens, you can.
You know, it is the absurdity of the time that we are living in now that a very obvious affront to every sensibility, you know, that we should possess, that there is someone out there who is using the letter of the law to defend his name being put up somewhere, when the spirit is clearly against what people feel about that person in that office. Rather than a moment to reflect, I think Francis Atwoli is he's just showing us how, you know, and perhaps to be a bit fatalistic.
You're trying to jump swear words?
I'm trying to self-edit. You know, you know, there's the expression I think the expression is when the gods want to destroy you, they first make you blind, right? And what's happening is that there is a collective blindness of our political class and our political elite in this country to the problems, even to the aspirations that are in the Constitution, to the extent that they continuously defend things that are indefensible. And you know, journalists have opinions. For those people who thought that we don't, it's just that we choose to keep them out of our work. But as an example, on the Building Bridges initiative, and the work and the effort that went into selling this initiative in the middle of a pandemic, just speaks to that, how at odds many times our leaders are with our own rights to safety, our own rights to health, all of these things which are expressed in the Constitution. So as Spencer said, there are things that are in the letter of the law and that were written in that spirit that continuously, you know, are subjected to the whims of you know, politicians, leaders, and even the business elite that act with impunity. On trade unions, you see, because I also grew up in the time when, you know, Atwoli sort of like rose to power, and so for a long time he's been the face of the trade union movement. But trade unions in other countries, and even in some part here, for some part of our history, have been institutions where the interests of a large part of our society, the working class, could have been represented and become an interest group that then, you know, can represent their rights, their goals, both personal and as a group, and become tools for collective bargaining. Unfortunately, it has become more about the people at the top of those institutions than about the people who make those organizations. That is a dangerous thing, right? When we continuously focus on the people who are at the apex of these institutions, as opposed to the interests of the workers in various parts of this country who need that representation, for the sole purpose that it actually makes a difference in their pockets, in their lives, then we have a problem. Yeah. You know, we have the Kenyan Union of Journalists, for instance. When I joined journalism, it was in our contract that we could not join the KUJ, right? We couldn't unionize, right? Which is a serious problem for people who are speaking, you know, about the rights of other people. That was a problem for unionizing, right? And I remember how we were made to think that the Union of Journalists was a bad institution, right? And yet these are institutions that are supposed to help in the advancement of my own career, in my own, you know, my own personal interest should have been taken care of. But now that there is no seeming leadership or representation, it shows you that, I think for me, the whole Atwoli issue is a microcosm of one of the problems, the very serious problems that we face here. I'd be interested to know what you think, given, you know, that you sit in circles with some of these people who make these decisions, and sometimes some of the people who make decisions that affect, you know, all of us. Is it difficult to sort of swim against the tide, I guess?
So without trying to mute Yusuf, we've got about another 5 to 7 minutes, and I'm interested to hear also, Yusuf, from you, really the power of unions and the relationship with the National Assembly, and potentially leadership both in the legislative and leadership in civil society as well, more broadly.
I think if we start with the trade union movement, the trade union movement, as you know, was a pioneer in the struggle for independence. We could absolutely not have moved our liberation and our freedom and our emancipation as a nation without the trade union movement. In fact, our political struggle started with the trade union movement, with Hari Dhuku, Makan Singh, Fred Kubai, Tom Mboya. These were the leading lights of the independent struggle, in addition to the other. So it has a history. It has enormous power of liberation. And what happened again in 1963, after independence, is that Kotu became an appendix of the ruling party. It was incorporated into the ruling infrastructure that was put up by then leadership. And it ceased to be an independent voice for our trade union movement since that period. And over time, there has been a number of struggles to revive it, like Dennis Akumu, who was a great trade unionist, who was among the people who tried to change and reform it. But our trade union movement association, Kotu, really needs a major change. It has not gone through the changes our political parties have gone through, our legislative system has gone through, our constitutional system has gone through. There is a need for it really to change rapidly, to be able to be an expression and the voice of the Kenyan working class. And then I wanted to come and point out the fact that the issue of the Constitution, which has been mentioned a number of times. The institution is just a document. Unless we can put the other institutions and support system into place, it will just remain so. And in every country in the world, the implementation and the institutionalization of the Constitution is a struggle. And that's why you need an active, alert, and organized citizenry, an active citizenship, which would inculcate the culture of accountability, transparency, and that does not exist at the moment. Our citizenship, our citizens are fragmented. We somehow seem to be pushed into some kind of an apartheid ethnicity, in which every community is itself and would not get involved if another group was involved in that particular issue. So I think that is an issue that the civil society and other organizations can help in terms of civic education, in terms of empowerment at the local level. And then the other thing that has been mentioned is the corruption element. You know, my concern, having come back from outside, and one of the biggest concern was how the culture of corruption is entrenched, is that we do not have a common understanding of what corruption is. For example, when I was campaigning in my constituency, you would see people coming for handouts, and you try to explain, and you say that I don't think you should give me a vote because I'm giving you a handout, and then they would ask you, but how do you expect us to help you if you don't want to help us? They don't see that as a corruption. They don't see the little money that they give to the police as corruption. There is such a high threshold of tolerance to corruption and to corrupt individuals that it is there's a need to change that mentality at the local level. You know, people admire, venerate, and celebrate highly corrupt individuals, some of whom are public figures. For example, a good example is our city. When we were electing our governor, the character and the nature of the governor candidate was in big question mark. But people didn't care. He was throwing handouts. He was bribing openly through his services. Nevertheless, they elected him. And for a while, our capital city was captured by organized crime. But if Sonko was to come back now and ask for a vote, the same citizens who were shocked by what was happening in their capital city would probably vote him back again. So there is we need a change of mindset in that area, and that requires a lot of work and a lot of activities, because people assume that the only way you can be elected or you can hold office is by giving money and by distributing money, and not through your ideas and your policies and what you're going to do for that community. And it appears many of the citizenry has bought into that. So I think there's a question mark. we're criticizing our elite. But we also must we need to have an informed, educated, and active citizenry to change that situation.
Beautiful. A great place to leave it this morning. And just thank you to everybody. Thank you, first of all, to those of you who physically have joined us. And I'm sure there's evidence this is not a corona spreader event, so you will return as safely as you came. And to those of you on YouTube and Facebook Live, please thank you for joining us this morning, this 58th Madaraka Day. Continue tweeting and posting at hashtag Dialogue and Dissent, and also hash Madaraka Day 2021. I'd like to very warmly just welcome you to a cup of tea, and we're also going to be doing a book signing exercise. I'm told that's kind of important, and we have to do that. So I've been practicing my handwriting the whole week. It's a font that is not recognizable by Microsoft. But I'm trying my best. So I will do that, I believe, at one of the tables at the back. The book is available at Cheche. It's exclusively at 1,600 shillings for a month or so. And after that, it will go up slightly and will be available in most Kenyan bookshops. And please also take the opportunity to empty your salary or whatever else you have on your M-Pesa in the bookshop. It's a great bookshop. We have to support it. This is not, essentially pitching it up against Textbook Center and the other bookshops that the book will be in, but essentially my suggestion for the next month or so, please promote Cheche, and thanks to them for this. Thanks also to the film crew. They're very special to me because this is the film crew that put together 18 Hours a few years ago, the movie about the late Alex Madaga, who is in the book. And I'm just honored that they have decided to do this for us. Thank you very much, and I hope to see each other soon, if not on social media, more personally. Thanks once again. And I was told to say this, please stay expressed always. All right, so the three of us will just take a photograph with the book. Is there a meeting of the minds? Is there a need for this relationship to be nurtured?
I think it's nurtured from the simple fact that the creation of any character is a political act, in the sense that when you create a character, you're assigning a gender, you're assigning a race, you're assigning possibly a tribe, you're assigning a background, an ethnicity, a social class. The mere fact of creating or recreating a character or imagining a character, you have created a political statement. And that person has to go through the world, because we are political beings, in the sense that we have started to create structures and devise ways of who we like and who we don't like, depending on random political structures that often have nothing to do with us, right? So with that, there will always be an interlink between the work of human rights and the work of art, and the work of social justice and the work of art, because both of them are dealing with the same things. We're dealing with human stories, and we're dealing with humanity. So in creating hopeful, joyful images of ourselves and hopeful, joyful images of the world, I think that we are saying, look at everything else we can be. Look at what are the possibilities of happiness? What are the possibilities of removing these political boundaries, you know? And that's exactly what I feel social justice activists are doing, is trying to create spaces for an opportunity to equal rights and an opportunity that is free of political oppression.
You're smart, you're creative, and you're now filming for the world. What impact do you want your films to leave on Kenyans?
I'm a big believer of art for art's sake, first and foremost, because I believe that we imprint our humanity in art, and that art can be left behind for many generations after us to know what we were like, to see what Nairobi was like, to see what, you know what I mean, what people thought, felt, you know? I think of myself very much as somebody who records the past, the present, and possibly even the future of us, right? And actually, I have, Pumzi was about the future, so that we have a sense of who we are, who we can be, and the full potential of
About 20 to 30. Might have traffic up ahead.
We need to know where you are. Okay, Esther. Esther, you have to slow down. Just take a deep breath. Now tell me, what happened?
So what do we have?
Pedestrian involved in a high-speed hit and run.
How long ago?
That's all we have.
Mic 1. Good. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Let me invite you to take your seats. We are about to go into the second session. And we will be live in a few minutes. Live stream.
Oh, okay.
So it's available and it will be up afterwards. Huh? So what you will probably need to do is just be sensitive to that. You know, I know you're getting this pressure, but there's a line that activists start with, which says, those people who join government, they have to be condemned.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, they have to be protected.
Actually, you're right.
You know why? Yes.
I know, right.
So a couple of government officers, quite senior, who said, can I come? Take your seats. We're about to begin. We started the morning with staying expressed. We are now moving to staying safe. And actually, Jimo and others, maybe you can come to the front so that when the others come, and they will, they fill up from the back. Come forward a bit. The chairs are the same price. Yes. Okay, last call for those of you who are joining us to come and take your seats. We're about to kick off. Disruption. That's good. Okay. Cuba, ready to go? All right. You're going to alert the team. We can go live with the video. So we're going to start with a short video that situates us very geographically at a place where the Constitution was born to some extent. If there was a single point, this is the one. Right here in Uhuru Park, within this square mile, in many ways, the Constitution was born. It's a little longer. And as we're waiting for the technology to catch up with us, just to say that we will be live on YouTube and on Facebook. And we will be tweeting and posting using the hashtag Dialogue and Dissent. One word, hashtag Dialogue and Dissent. And also hashtag Happy Madaraka Day 2021. Right here in Uhuru Park, within this square mile, in many ways, the Constitution was born. We have audio, no visual. The infamous Nyayo House, where tortures, interrogation, and violence was meted out in the name of the state against human rights defenders. Many of them were journalists, students, workers, lawyers. And then to my right is where most of the governments have been inaugurated, but even this is where the Constitution was promulgated back in 2010. And even further, as I go around, is the famous Ministry of Health, where there have been so many health scandals. In fact, at one point we stopped calling it Afia House and started calling it Mafia House. Within that area is also All Saints Cathedral, a symbol of rebellion, a symbol of freedom, a symbol of protection for the vulnerable. This, in many ways, is where God spoke to those people who resisted tyranny, who resisted dictatorship and corruption. And for many, many people within the Anglican Church, this is one of their finest hours. Even further is the famous Serena Hotel, where at one of our darkest moments in 2008, the peace deals were negotiated. For many months, people came to the now called the Amani Room at Serena and negotiated the accords that eventually brought the violence to an end and also gave birth and urgency to a new constitutional order that would happen 12 years later. Thank you very much, and welcome and happy 58th Madaraka Day. Madaraka is a Kiswahili word for authority or power to rule oneself. And this year it takes on new significance in the context of indebtedness, recession, the pandemic, and the recent High Court judgment that the Building Bridges Initiative process fell short of the public participation that was required under the Constitutional Article 257. There is no better time to launch Dialogue and Dissent, a constitution in search of a country, and to discuss constitutionalism and active citizenship. We are now live on Facebook and YouTube. We are also posting with the hashtag Dialogue and Dissent and hashtag Madaraka Day 2021. I'd like to introduce two human rights defenders, a community activist, and a public health officer. The first organizes Pussy Power in Mathare. Yes, I said Pussy Power in Mathare. And at the time that he was interviewed, the second speaker was the Secretary General of the very powerful KMPDU, the medical union. He is now in charge of public health services for the county of Nairobi. Both of you are very welcome. And the theme of our second of the 4 Madaraka Day sessions is staying safe. Welcome to those of you who have come in person. You are the brave ones. Please, if you see a friend next to you, don't move your chair next to them. The chairs are located with enough distance to keep you safe. And thank you very much for joining us at this second of the 4 series that we're running, 4 sessions that we're running today. So I'm going to start with asking, inviting Oluga to ask the first question.
Thank you, Houghton, and congratulations for this wonderful book, Dialogue and Dissent. Back then in 2015, when we first met, and I was just a year old in office as the Secretary General of Kenya Medical Practitioners, Pharmacists and Dentists Union. We had lots of conversations, and one of the most inspiring and powerful things was to encourage me to just be comfortable in the circumstances of pushing power. And this is a big central theme in your book in terms of inspiring other people to rise above their comfort and their circumstances to do what they love to do for society. Why is this very important? Why did you choose this theme of inspiring people to rise above their comfort and circumstances?
Thanks, Oluga, and again, thank you for being with us this morning. Madaraka Day is an important day, I think, in the Kenyan calendar. So I started off really, and the book has a central theme. It has a theme around walls and knocking down walls. And walls, as we know, can protect people. They can also exclude people. But these particular walls were the walls that surrounded Langata Road Primary School. And the moment that personal crisis, and I'm going to turn to page 6 for those of you who have the book, and just read that moment of discomfort that really allowed me to find my purpose and my focus. With my eyes open, I walked into my personal crisis one sunny Monday morning on the 19th of January 2015. That day, I joined Society for International Development colleagues, local leaders, Boniface Mwangi to support 300 children, parents and teachers from the Nairobi's Langata Road Primary School to reclaim their school playground. The story is told in quite a level of degree of details. I won't go through the rest of it and just invite you to read the story behind the story. But for me personally, one of the things that I was left with in that moment was a real newfound purpose for this country. And it wasn't just my own sense of what I could do, but it was really that people began to look at me slightly differently, right? I was 49 years of age. I wasn't yet a grandfather, I don't think. Was I a grandfather at the age of 49? Looking at my daughter. Yes, I was just a grandfather. And there were two reactions to the incident. The first was, Irongo, surely you are too old to be doing these kind of things. This is the work of the under 35 Boniface Mwangi. The second comment was that I had endangered children. The first one was fairly easy to respond to. What I did was I said, I have never been to Langata Road Primary School before. I have never had a child that went to that school, but I understand the importance of children having the right to play. And I understand the danger of politicians and business people thinking that they can remove 2.5 acres from a school that would be there for several generations and use it for a car park. That for me was an obvious response. The endangerment of children was a more difficult one because I did believe that we took as many steps to protect the children during that day as we could. And that actually the violence, the tear gas, the dogs were not brought by the activists. They were brought by men and women wearing police uniforms. Over 100 police officers from at least 6 different police stations were mobilized to protect the occupation of a school by a hotel. So I think one of the things that I hope you'll come away with the book is really that we all have walls to push within us, right? And they may not be school walls on on school playgrounds, but they are definitely walls that keep us from being big, audacious, and bold. So that's the message that I really wanted to share in the book. Let me turn to Rachel, who I met in the context of writing this book. Now, if I was to tell you all the things we have done since then, it would be another session by itself. But let me cast you back to that period in 2016 when we first met, and I was first inspired by you. It's been 5 years since we first talked. I've watched your analysis sharpen. I watched your voice grow. Is it easier for you in 2021 to take a stand that is sometimes unpopular with your community when you know you are speaking truth?
Thank you, Rungu, and congratulations once again for your book, and also to acknowledge the comrades from Mashinani, Gasheke, Olal, and Jemo. And when you're having discussion, you told me, Gasheke told you, Irungu, stop tweeting, start writing a book. Gasheke, umona matokeo? I hope umefurahia. Yeah, so I think Irungu, if I can look, because maybe at that time, maybe we didn't, we were not clear on how we met in terms of, because I remember our first incident was the Pan-African Congress in KCC 2014. And looking now things the way they are in terms of organizing and the way things were when we met, when we sat down, when we used to work for SID. One thing is that when I was going through the book, because I haven't read it full, that I need also to say pongezi, is the intersectionality bit, the one you have brought it. And I like it when you said pussy power here. And someone asked, is it pussy power? So yeah, it's intersectionality politics within the movement. And also, this day is very important to me, the fact we have in this discussion. And also a sad moment that we lost one of our diplomatic pussy power convener, that is Naomi Rael. She used to work with the Belgian embassy. And looking now where we are, where we can have this discussion of radical women rights organizing in this kind of a fora, it means we are heading somewhere. At this moment where we have seen the Kenyan government, and we were talking with Mercy, the commitment that Uhuru, during the launch of gender equality, made in ensuring that when it comes to violence against women, which is also a background that my passion was triggered in organizing, is because of the violence I had to go through growing up. It shows we are going somewhere. But this journey is not easy, and I'm happy to see Rungu where you are as a person, also as an individual. I like to do it like intergenerational learning, that it's a process whereby you have to find your mantra. Me, I was that one person. Maybe people would say, activists wakila tu wakoroga. I was that person that if it comes to land, if it comes to JEs, fighting JEs and everything, I was there. But the reason why I was there, being also a feminist, and being that in my life in activism, and I'm below 30, yeah? I mean youth bado. In my life of activism, the reason why I had to fight for causes, maybe people will think feminists are not fighting, is because of intersectionality. There's no if and but when it comes to human rights. Human rights is usually human rights for all. And the fact also of having people who have held my hand, not having the if and buts, having you, the being of a person, I think also is another bit that has sharpened my activism. And being authentic myself, and also like naming the people who have been there for me. And that's why I really like, I was going through the book and I really like on how you're able to mention individuals. Like if it's Dr. Kimeu on working with transparency, and you realize that most of the people also are mentioned, they're not in those organizations like per title, but they're still doing important work that you have mentioned in different spaces. And they still exist as individuals with the touch you had, all of you collectively. People like Phyllis Omido, who works on environmental rights in Mombasa, and she's doing a lot of fantastic work. These are the people I look up to within the movement. People like Prof. Wangare Madai, and I like the way you have also bring it on also your interaction with her. Despite she's dead, but her legacy still lives on. A legacy of the mothers of political prisoners, being a feminist and organizing from grassroots community. These are the legacy that keeps on triggering us to continue with this struggle. But now when you say the theme, our theme is stay safe. How safe are we if human rights are not respected? We are not safe. So it calls also for personal contribution on all of us standing for human rights. Yeah.
That's great. I'm going to read a section from page 58. Those of you who are in church regularly, you know this exercise, so turn to page 58. And it's a section really from my interaction with Rachel. Rachel Mwikali is equally remarkable. She tells her story thus. The community knows about the Constitution and the rights that it holds for them. The challenge is not to exercise their rights. The challenge is how to exercise their rights, as the government is not implementing the Constitution. Death is normalized in Mathare. It is not a coincidence that women outnumber men 4-1. Violent crime, mob justice, and extrajudicial killings are completely linked. Once, Rachel risked her life to, and there may be more than once now. Once, Rachel risked her life to stop the community from killing a man who was accused of a crime. She persuaded the community to take them to the police instead. And when they arrived at the station, imagine her shock when the police told her off, saying, "What are you doing? You could have brought us dead bodies instead." The system is stacked against young and poor men. Not just the poor men that we see on our timelines on Twitter, but also men like Gibson Minor, who is not here today, who I also interviewed in 2016. Men and leaders like Gasheke, like James, like Happy, who are here today, who in the community continue to rise, to document, to shout, to protect. And really, I hope that this book reaches some of the state officers, that they too can see their role in protecting people over this period. I'm going to turn to Oluga, and I'm going to skip the reading in the book, partly because when I wrote the book, it talked about, it quoted you saying, we may be losing up to Kenya shillings, 1.1 billion shillings, because of public procurement fraud. The figure is now out of date. So I'm just going to ask him the simple question. Oluga, you took a career decision at the age of 10 when your father died. Tell us about that moment and whether he still inspires you to this day.
Thank you very much again, Irungu, for this question. I think for me, and this is usually a very nostalgic moment. One time when I was young, I was in class 5 then, 10 years old, and living in the village. My dad, may his soul rest in peace, was a teacher, and he was making sisal, and I was by his side trying to arrange for him. And he just went into this deep conversation about how he's a teacher, and for you, this is what the world holds. And I used to read books for him. I used to read books for him and also read newspapers. So as he's doing his things, he would either bring a newspaper and I would be reading it aloud. I would be reading it out aloud for him. And then I really used to admire the Attorney General, Amos Wako, because he would be on the newspapers every single day. Every headline was about Amos Wako. And I think we started this conversation about, I think every parent does this, about what do you want to be in the future. And because I had read this many books, for him, written by Tom Mboya, written by Kenyatta, written by many other people. We used to have a lot of books at home. So we went into this conversation, and my first response was that I want to be a lawyer. I want to be, in fact, I didn't say I want to be a lawyer. At 10 years, I said I want to be Attorney General. And because it was...
You're not very ambitious at that point.
I was not very ambitious at that point, because it was the headline on the newspaper. And so we went into this conversation, and he went back to talking about his own career as a teacher, the frustrations that they were going through, how he would wish better. And then he just posed questions, but why not being a doctor? And I think at that particular time I'd never experienced or seen or had what it would be like to be a doctor. But I think I took up the challenge from him at 10 years of age. And then he said one thing that I would not forget, that, in this our village, we do not have a doctor, and we do not know where we would go if we needed treatment. And then he went ahead to perhaps mention a few people who had suffered, who he thought would be treated but wouldn't be treated. And then he said, it would be a nice thing, for you to be a doctor. And I think from that moment, I never looked back. It's a very powerful thing for a parent, and I never looked back, actually. So I always keep replaying that in my mind. I thank God for that moment and for him, because I have never, ever had a career dilemma in my life.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. And that career dilemma didn't happen even when you were doing head surgery using a mulikamwizi, which is a true story also.
Yes, yeah. So for from that time going to school, I always focused my studies towards that direction of being a doctor. I sort of dropped all this childhood stories about all these things people want to do. Now, my dad would die 1 year later. He would die in the next year, just after this conversation. And I think that was also a very painful but also powerful moment in terms of reaffirming the things that you would have wanted his son to be. And that for me is living that history, because somehow I also relate his death to lack of care. He was going to do his business, doing a bicycle, and then he was just found by the roadside. And he was taken to the Sia District Hospital then. Just one day, my mom going to visit, and that evening, there used to be those booths, and there was a phone call, and they would call back, and in the market center anyone would pick, and guess who picked? Again, it was me. So those were powerful and painful moments to just sort of affirm the conviction to dedicate my life and my career to healthcare.
Let me fast forward a little bit. It's often said that our personal politics is often positional. And what that means for many of us is that depending on what role you play, so in my case, I was 10 years Pan-Africa director for Oxfam, and in many ways was a non-entity on the streets of Nairobi, right? I mean, I think my family barely recognized me, but there was no real recognition in terms of the work that I did, despite the fact that, for 10 years, maybe 18, AU, WTO, G8 meetings, I would be actually lobbying presidents and ministers. It had no currency locally. You take a stand, the context shifts around you. So the question I want to ask you is, there was a time when you would be speaking on behalf of 5,000 medical and health practitioners. You now work for a government, right? The county government. So many of these people are here. I assume you're clients, right? Please, he's not going to do any personal consultation in this event, but in case your minds went there. Has anything shifted in your understanding of the problems facing public health since you joined the Nairobi Metropolitan Services?
I think the answer is no. Fundamentally no. The problems facing public health care is the same. It's the lack of courage, it's the underfunding, it's the in terms of lack of priorities, in terms of policies, it's the corruption that you talk about. But these things happen in small bits that coalesce together to have a very huge negative impact. And for me, the conviction that we've run and the powerful collaborations that we had from KMPDU with SID to sort of coalesce forces that make change in healthcare. And just the one thing that I think we're very proud of from the time of KMPDU is we wanted to change the perception that doctors could not work for government. Because when I was a student in medical school, all of us looked forward to not working for government. So 7 out of 8 doctors would resign and they would leave the country. So this was just 2010. 7 out of 8 doctors. But in 2007, there were only 7 doctors in the whole public sector. And then I relate these things to what my father used to say: we don't have any doctor in this village. And that has a huge impact to the common man, the ordinary man in the village who, when they are sick, when there is a mother has complications in labor, there's no one to save that life. And so I think I would have these convictions in terms of this push. So 2011, we registered the union because of the new constitution again. In fact, your book is A Country in Search of a Constitution. So it is the 2010 constitution that permitted organizations such as KMPDU to exist. Before 2010 constitution, it was outlawed for doctors to have a union. I think this is something that the country does not know. Because it was after the 2010 constitution promulgation, then in 2011, we registered the union. And once we registered the union, we were very clear in terms of what we wanted to do. We wanted to work for our country. Because the norm then was that you get out of medical school, you do your professional mandatory internship, then you get an NGO job. There was a lot of NGOs in the HIV and the reproductive health sector, or you leave the country. As we speak, there are 4,000 Kenyan doctors who are outside the country. All of them left before 2009. If you're looking at from 2011 when we formed the union, we've managed to retain more than 65% of all Kenyan doctors who graduate in Kenyan soil. In fact, to be honest, it is better now to work with the government than to work with the private sector. And that, the impact of that, we saw that in 2016, 2017. When you go to places like Wajir, far off in Ethiopia, Habasweni, those places, for the first time, you find a doctor in a hospital. If you go to Nairobi, in Kibra Dio, for example, for the first time in 2020, you find a doctor. This has impact. Over time, the person who lives next by, the common man, does not have to think that you must be a rich person to go and pay some private consultation to see a doctor. And that's fundamental for us. And that's the big change. So fundamentally, the answer is no. And in my position now, what we do is to champion the same things using different tools. For them, the power was the mobilization power of 5,000 doctors, the constitution, the labor laws. Now it's a different set of tools. It's policies, maybe it's budgeting, maybe it's a collaboration with other partnerships. But the goal and the vision is the same.
Great. Thank you very much. So I'm going to open up for questions and comments also. You're welcome. We are live on Facebook, and we're live also on YouTube. Hashtag Dialogue and Dissent, and also hashtag Madaraka Day 2021. So you have two resources on the stage. You have a radical feminist who is unafraid, who brings not just the personal and the political together, but I would say also the pubic. So you have 3 P's there. So personal, public, and the pubic. Have you ever used that before? I just thought about it. As like you were talking, I was like, this is pretty cool. Let's do all 3. But really, you know, issues of sexuality, issues of self-determination, issues of expression, issues of safety and dignity is really everything that Rachel and the people she works with are about. You also have a public health activist, if I can still use that term for Dr. Oluga, who is a public health activist in the context of a raging global, once-in-a-century pandemic, right? We are not yet vaccinated. So there may be a couple of questions there, I think, and comments. Anybody would like to ask a question or a comment? And we can have microphones coming to you. Yep, I can start here, and then move to Dandora.
So once again, of course, Irungu, congratulations on your book, and thank you very much to both speakers. I want to ask you a question about safety, because I know both of you and your personal circumstances. I think my very first meeting with you, Dr. Oluga, was a few days before you were publicly shaven, taken into remand with your fellow colleagues, and there was a real attempt to not just harass, but also humiliate you in an attempt to really strip the doctors and the medics of their voice and of their dignity. And the same with you, Rachel. I think our history together has lots of moments when there have been concerns about personal safety. And this, to an extent, could be one of the reasons why there's a little bit of reticence for people who feel strongly about something to actually take an action, because they've got the photo of Oluga and your colleagues from that day, and they've got the stories of Rachel Feminista and what has happened. How do you get over the incident and create of it something important enough that allows you to keep moving beyond the fear of personal safety and beyond the fear of the safety of your family and of those who you care for? How do you move beyond that? And perhaps safety physically, but also mentally continuing to be strong and to be well enough to keep moving and to keep acting.
Great. Let's go to Happy. So I think you hold the microphone for you just so that we don't give you two things at the same time.
Okay, thanks. I think I have a comment to each one of you in the panel. I'll start with my comrade sister, Rachel Mwikali. I think we've been in the journey quite a longer time with you. And I'm so inspired to see how unlimited you are, how you are growing you are just growing, just amazing. So mine is just to encourage you that having a woman from Madare grow like you is so inspiring, and it inspires other young girls just not to be limited. And I think we'll have further discussion on how do we get more girls like you and in other various communities just to see their potential. Daktari, personally, I don't see him as a doctor. I see him as a worker. And recently there have been the discussion when a road was named Atuoli in this neighborhood. And personally, I wish you could have remained in the sector to fight for workers' rights, because what you did at KEM, whatever, was more powerful. In recent times, we've had workers where the government does what they do and the workers can only shout in social media and nothing happens. So my question is, do you see a future of workers' rights with Atuoli now being the power broker that he is, that doesn't no longer care about workers? But we were inspired with people like you rising up. Now you have ran away from the union again. So what do you think is the future of the workers' unions? And I have a bigger voice.
Always.
Yeah, so what do you think is the future of workers' unions with all matters remaining constant as they are? And to my comrade Irungu, it has been a journey. And I know you are personally, because of both Dialogue and Dissent, when you are in Dialogue, people say you are in government. And when you are dissenting with us, you are part of us. But there's a bigger question on the Dialogue part. because the dialogue, the government are also very crafty. Like I remember we've been with you in the police reforms working group, where we've spoken about extrajudicial killings, we've met the whole security sector, talking about how to improve. But a week later, another young person is shot. Personally, I've felt so drained, and there's a time I said I will not participate in any more dialogue, because you have very good discussions about police reforms, about no more killings, about the right to protest. Then after a week or two, you are back to the same discussion, same killing. So I don't know how do you
keep going. How do you reconcile the two? Good.
How do you now combine the two without losing trust from people like Allan, who are tired of dialogue, which are not making sense, and without losing the dialogue that you want. So that has been one of the questions I said I will come to ask. So thanks, and thanks for inviting me.
Karibu sana. Let me invite Rachel first to respond, I think to Renee's initial question, and of course it's directed also to Oluga. We'll go to Oluga, then come back to me, and then we'll open up again. Those of you who are on YouTube and Facebook, we are listening to your questions. Just type them in, and they'll be read to us and to the panel to respond.
Thank you, Rungu. Thank you, Renee, for the question. And I think for me, that's the question that I think needs more focus, especially now, at the moment also where all of us, no matter the case, we are defending 2010 Constitution despite the ruling. And first, I'll start on the same page. I don't know if to read it or to leave it. The part, 58th page, the part where Rungu states of my role working with the National Youth Service. And the fact I am an activist, a community leader, and a feminist, it wasn't an easy role. And I'm happy some of the comrades that Olal, Gasheke, at that point also, they know where it sort of put me into, and the kind of disagreement we had even within ourselves as activists. Because my role being in that National Youth Service cohort project was, I was not a staff of the government, but I was a community leader who was fighting to have even most of us activists take leadership in that project. The famous project, all of us know how it went. And my role there was that I ensured the human rights guidelines were followed. I was not this into celebrity space where everybody knew me. I was the activist in the ground that doesn't know even how to use social media or anything, to be honest. And it felt bad and lonely, but also I thank the fact we were all of us product of Bunge, the Mwananchi, and me being raised also with Madare Mothers Development Center and community, and being also into Amnesty Kenya spaces of right to housing. Telling the government you need to follow human rights protocol when it comes to eviction doesn't work in the park, and you know slums when it comes to housing rights. The structures, we are told it's public land, but the structures owners will not joke with you. And the structure is, even I don't know if they're structure owner or land grabbers or whatever. And not even landlords, don't give them landlords. Yes, slumlords. And I think for me, if there's a point I learned leadership the hard way, it was in that period. Period that people were sent to come and burn my house, and even it's not like a house that I'm owning, it's aluminium apartment house. And you know when I say aluminium apartment house, this is 10 by 10 house, because I stay close to the road. Nobody really understood. Nobody, even the village elders that I was supposed to work with, even the local administration. When it comes to corruption, when money exchange hands, you are seen as the enemy. But for me, I was like, some of this, like I was very strategic, that some of these things, I want also to be the spaces of resistance. And that's why you'll see when we have one of the building, written Pussy Power, and having a community resistance where human rights work can be embedded within the community. But now coming to point of all of us, the whistleblowers, and I'm happy it's also online, why it's important even to invest to protection or whistleblowers or activists or feminists. And especially in line to the work Olal also does, that when I met Irungu, it was through the line of me fighting extrajudicial killing, like before it became a thing of the public and the organization. It's not easy. I'll tell you, I've been into a lot of threats and a lot of risks, but the ones that makes me feel sometimes as if I'm mad in my own way, it's when I demand accountability from the police. Most of the time, and I think this is also like both, the government needs to be held into account, especially when it comes holding the police accountable. You're defending for the right of the people and the rule of law to be respected and implemented. But the same police are the ones who will come and look at you, and especially if you're a woman, your biology will be used against you. Your biology in terms, how many abortions you have done, being a supporter of safe abortion, and how many men you have slept with, as if sleeping with them is bad. And the point of whereby when targets now your family, it's where also the rubber hits the road. Because now the family also blames you. They're like, there have been instances where my grandmother like, and my mom, because they work into vegetable and market, they're like, you start selling tomato. Stop these stupidity things you're doing. Because it's sort of bring me to a level like not everybody understand. You want to continue agitating. You want to continue defending the Constitution. But who is there to defend you? Some of us, and especially women, we risk even our own personal love life for this struggle. And that's the thing I've come to realize even when I just turned 29. I'm like, in my own life I've been struggling. Even I don't understand how does it mean to be a girl. Like being at that moment of even being a child. Like I would want just to going back to my life and understand how does it mean. But it has been struggle, country, but who really understand? And now adding also Irungu's role of, and I think which I'm happy also Renee you are here, we're also Amnesty now we are having the protection dockets of protecting whistleblowers. It's very important and very vital. Because if you don't protect us, it means next time when things are high, I'll be like, well, I can as well hapa madhare na stories. But I think also we need to acknowledge that most of us are not doing this work because it gives money. It's because of passion, conviction, and now we want to see justice and live in a society where there's no women rights violation, there's no human rights violation, but seeing things moving in the right direction. When these kids grow up, at least for them to have another struggle, not the ones we are struggling.
That we have moved on. Yeah. Oluga, I'm sure that moment in the courtroom and subsequently is still alive with you now. How do you respond to Renee?
Yeah, I think that those moments will be alive with me forever. And yes, it can be very scary for this kind of work. I think our colleague Allan and what Rachel has said is so true. The question is, what's the alternative? And then that's if you find a personal answer, and this is really a personal answer, what's the alternative? If you've lived in a moment of deep conviction where if you don't take action, even your own life is in danger, and the lives then of very many people. Society grows when people change it, you know, and at some point you ask yourself, if I don't, then who? And this is the moment that we have lived with. For me, I think leading the union and even now, but also it comes from a deep sense of conviction and a deep sense of decision that this is what I want to do. And just like Martin Luther said, if you haven't found something to die for, then you have not found something to live for. And I think that is the point about the issue of safety. But also I think I need to tamper it a bit. And the reason why I'm here is because we met with Houghton then. He was director SID, not just Amnesty. And so many other people. I think we organized a dialogue with influencers then, social media influencers. And we got to work with so many other organizations, because then that creates a safe space for you. People who will respond when something is wrong, people who will come to the courtroom. You know, we had, and I want to thank them because I think they've never been thanked enough. The lawyers who responded to us, Mutula Kilonzo, Philip Murgor, James Orengo, we never paid them a single cent. They came there because they saw what was going on. And before that, even before Senator Omar, there are so many politicians who came. There are so many people in the government, I can tell you this for sure. And maybe let me tell my brother Olal this for sure. There are so many people within the government. They will not be with you on the streets. They will not address a press conference with you, but they'll give you vital information. They will protect you. These people exist, and they are all the way from the office of the president to the smallest office in this land. And I think it is very important to understand that activism in itself is not an end. There is what you want. Whatever you want, so many people want it. Everyone in this country wants better health care. Whether they are a policeman, whether they are the president, everyone. There may be interest here and there may be threats, you know, but you find a coalition of people who want something. There are people who would bring for us water, and we would not know who they are. There are people who gave us a safe space. I remember before we went to the court and we were arrested, there is a time a warrant of arrest was released against us. And now I can say it, I hope it's not a threat. We were hidden just next to Kilimani police station, and someone offered his house for free to hide all of us. These people exist, and that contribution is as powerful as the people who come to raise their hands with you in the streets. And it is very important for us who are in this human rights cause to understand that, so that we are not just acting on ourselves. There are very many people who can help us. I think that the second question is about the future of workers' rights, or the question about safety was asked by Rene, our friend, and also about media. And you know, the society is very, I can say it's very accommodating. You know, the society is always accommodating, and once they find that you're fighting a cause that they resonate with, then therein you find safety. Of course, there will be a lot of threats. It's true that there are a number of people who've lost their lives, but it's just with everything. You know, we have had people who've died because there's lack of ambulances, and that could be you. So you could as well die defending the right to have an ambulance. Yeah, so I think for me, that's how I reason about it. The issue about workers' rights, yes, it is true, and I love it, and I still do it up to now. And the face, as I mentioned, the face then, the tools are different. And we love to do it, but also it's not a means in itself. It's not just about workers having good rights. About, and I mentioned it to you, it's about the person who needs to get care. So when the doctor is not there, when the surgeon has not been promoted or paid, who suffers? It is the people in Turkana who are walking with this huge load. For 30 years, someone has this load because there's never been a surgeon. So when you fight for the right to have a doctor employed, promoted, paid better, so that there's a surgeon in Turkana, it's about that person. And if we can all do our various parts in terms of the workers' rights, other people are doing their bit, budgeting, all these kind of things, they meet at that point where when we have a society that is livable, that we all can call and be proud of as home, as a place that we apply ourselves and have human dignity. I think that for me is the most important.
That's great.
Maybe Runga can add something, if it's okay, in terms of also, one thing as comrades or within the activism space that we should not take it for granted, is when one of us is arrested, the more we show up in police station, it really motivates someone. And the way we sing there, it's not a joke, by the way. It motivates you even when you are feeling like, I'm quitting. Did I make a mistake? At least you understand, this is the thing I usually say, you understand there are people who are in the same sort of madness as you that really connect with you. Because most of the time people will be like, you're always in trouble, blaming you, and you're like, yeah, I'm not looking for trouble. I just want us to have a good country where all of us can be proud of. And then the other thing in terms of protection is spreading the risk within ourselves, something that I've learned to do. There are things nowadays, even ask Gasheke when he calls me, I'm like, Gasheke, like the incidents that happened in Madara, I was like, me, I'm not going there. I'm seeing it, but writing it on my Twitter, they'll get me here. So if there's anybody who's not living in Madara, I'll be like, you just tweet it. Even most of the time, it'll be like, Irungu, you speak, me, I'm not speaking. And also we need to understand even within our own space, because sometimes, Rene, threat doesn't come from also external, sometimes even internal. In terms where also your fellow comrades expect you do certain things and you're like, if I analyze my risk assessment, it puts me more at risk. And if I'm being put more at risk, there are people who are looking at me. If I die, maybe their level will go low. So we have to protect ourselves. The other part of also is your network. Your network is your net worth. That, I think, is something that has worked also for me, like seeing who are you within your contacts, who are in your tribe, the role of even diplomatic community. If a police is saying Rachel is a leader of a criminal, and then they see me with an ambassador in Madare, how will you convince the public I'm a criminal? So also, like, there's different roles on how all of us need to play, and also the reciprocative solidarity. If I'm having, most of our work, activism work, is not a paid work. It's a work you do it with passion and conviction. So if, for example, I'm expected, I've had comrades who will be like, Najouna Sukari, we are bringing you sugar. You don't have maize flour, we are bringing you maize flour. So that's reciprocative solidarity. You don't have to have all of us on the street. But having people like the way you said, who will give their houses, people will be like, I'm buying you an air ticket to move from one point to another, or from one location to another. It plays a critical role. And sometimes these people don't identify as activists. They're just individuals. Some are in the business, some are just like people in the church or anywhere, but they really recognize the role you play. Yeah.
I wanted to bring into the room one activist.
And Justice Martha Koome, the current CJ, she's the one who released us from jail.
Oh, really?
I mean, she was in the panel, and I remember, I think I was watching it on TV from Committee Maximum Prison. And, you know, she just ordered the lawyers, all of you, go and do what you do, but the outcome is that they have to be released. And that was it. So, you know, these kind of things exist, and they may be in those positions.
And that is a story that should be told when she was being vetted and in for some interesting months and years to come. I want to bring in somebody who would have been here if he was in the country, and that is Eric Gitare. Because there is one community in this country, as I was writing this book, that I was very conscious of. And it is the most silent, the most invisible, and to some extent the most persecuted, because it is the one community that this constitution does not really focus on. And that is the community of lesbians, gays, transgender, intersex, and queer citizens. I'm going to read you a section of the book. One area that the Bill of Rights failed to enshrine, this is on page 107, was same-sex relationships and the rights of LGBTIQ citizens. According to the constitution drafters, the inclusion of language that would have protected this minority community or communities would probably have singularly caused its rejection in the referendum. Imagine this. Eric Gitare, who's one of the people that I interviewed the book, and was at that time, I think was still the director, maybe one of the directors of the National Gay and Lesbian Human Rights Commission, told me the story about how he courageously went before the NGO Coordination Board and demanded that they register the commission with the name the National Gay, Lesbian and Human Rights Commission. And they gave him a condition. They said, we will register this, yes, but you have to change the name. And of course, there have been many organizations working on sexual minorities and their rights, but none of them had ever been able to put the title, in the title, the names of the communities that they served. So this was the first time, and that case has been prosecuted right up to as many levels of the court as possible. But I want to tell you the story that Eric would tell if he was here. And it's on page 111. A few years ago, I finally shared with my family that I was a gay man. Rejection by my family has been my greatest fear since I realized I had an attraction to other men as a teenager. It was not easy. The Khmer language doesn't have much vocabulary to work with, only a descriptive language of same-sex attraction. But I knew that if I could be truthful at home, the world could not hurt me. Right? Very powerful. It was the conversation with my grandmother that was the most unexpected. I grew up listening to her mythological, her mythical and legendary stories as a daily staple for my curious mind. I wanted her to know my truth, to free myself from the guilt of lying to my family. I wanted to know if there were people like me in the village when she was growing up, before the colonial authorities and the missionaries arrived in Chuka. She listened until I was finished, and then she laughed heartily as she poured me tea. And she said firmly in Khmer, "There is no need for you to tell me you are gay, for that is your personal life. You are a grown man now." And she told me the story about how as a child in the 1920s, she got so sick that the Muntu Mogo, the medicine men, healed her. And some of the Muntu Mugo were known to be intimately living with other men. To my surprise, the existence of gay men was not news to her. Now, that level of courage, not only to go up against the state and a national culture that says you do not matter, I despise you, and to go up to your grandmother, knowing that her validation in that moment would break your spirit or not, is something that I think, many of us actually don't have those moments of reckoning, don't have those moments of courage. And I want to just acknowledge Eric. I think he's watching. It's very early where he is now, but I think he's watching. I just want to acknowledge Eric and the many, many people who walk that path, speaking their truth, living their lives as they would want it, and hoping that one day the rest of the country will wake up and not have this simplistic binary that leaves us thinking that there are only two genders. So I'm not sure if there's a question there, but discuss. Yes.
I think also in terms of also when I see intersectionality within the movement, and this one I know I'll disagree with some of the activists, and hate me, love me, it's fine. When it comes to human rights is usually for all. There's no but and if. And this is also something I'm struggling with, even within the women rights organization, when also we discuss about violence. I'm we know clearly there are violence, not only in heterosexual relationship, but let's say in lesbian relationship, that even I struggled during this time of COVID, trying to make organization understand there are lesbians that have been subjected to violence by their partners. But because of our biasness with gender justice, nobody wants to understand. We are refusing, and if there's something that really hurts, it's when people don't recognize you exist. It's most of us, the way we say, olal, that sisi watu isa dingine uruaiwe watu elewi, fighting to be recognized, yeah? So if all of us cannot also be able to put our biasness in terms of also the patriarchy level and our socialization bias in understanding gender justice, it means also us, in one or another, we are violating people's rights intentionally or unintentionally. So for me, it's very important, especially with the Repeal 162 case, it's very important, even as movements, as community, as a country, we recognize LGBTQ rights, the alphabet, is also human rights. And if you're standing, the Constitution of Kenya is the right applies to everybody. There's no if and buts. And it's sad that even now, in 21st century, we still have communities and families where gay and lesbian are killed. And we are all silent. So for me, I recognize the fact that if we are to move forward, we can't leave anybody behind. We have to put our efforts together. And when I say our efforts together, it's seeing how do we bring, because everyone plays a role in the movement. And everyone plays a critical power that they bring in to ensure we are able to bring this power and protect. And I resonate with the word, especially being a Kamba. One thing, even I was talking with Elvis, the finance manager for Amnesty, is that even in Kamba community, there are women who marry women, but we don't speak about it. It's called a weto. Women marry women in Kamba community. And if we can allow that, why not allow, when I come openly and say, like, Rachel, this is my my identity or my gender, and all of you should respect it the way you respect when it comes to local community.
So if Kamba lives matter, why don't everybody's life matter? That's the question we need to say here. Okay. I'm going to open up again for questions and comments. And no, I am coming to that one. I'm leaving that one for the last one because it's the juiciest one. There's a whole theory in the book around that one. Don't allow me to forget it. Laura, let me get a question from you. Mike coming from somebody who you might know well. Actually, the best way to do this is I am the mother of the children who are there. You're going to go there.
So I'm the creator of the grandchild who was forgotten. No, but I had a question on safety in activism, and you touched on it a little bit in feminism. And as a mother of 2 boys and a sister to other boys, I don't think it was very important to me, the safety of men inside of the conversation around women and women's rights. And I guess I just want to pose the question on accountability inside of activism. How do activists hold each other accountable without disempowering your voice? And for me personally, with the men in my life, the ones I've created and I live with, I think it's a very important question for boys in particular. But I think in all movements, what would your advice be in how do we manage that conversation in the public? Because you're already under scrutiny. There's already all these expectations when you choose to have a position in public. But I think you can't have real movement forward if only a few move at the cost of the others. And I think with men and women in particular, I feel like we're heading in a situation where women will have power at the cost of male safety and development. And what's your advice to that in particular, that conversation, but then generally accountability within activism?
That's great. Let's take a couple more. Yes, Gasheke at the back. And right at the back also.
Okay, thank you very much. So inspiring, Irongo. Ogo. And Rachel.
Oluga.
Oluga, the trade union is for the doctors, so powerful. And the articulation he has done for the struggle of the doctors, so great when you are facing this crisis. Me, I see the Irongo, you have done very powerful work, and you have dedicated this book to your grandchildren. History has put you very well, so powerful. I like the title, The Dialogue Dissent. I've seen the narrative inside, your engagement with the activist. This is very, very, very powerful. This is a powerful tool for our generation. I think there's one time I told Martin Shukukuna and Geto Wakahengeri to hand over the books of account from the history of Mau Mau, the struggle for multi-party democracy. I think for you, this is a book of accounts. You have handed us to your generation and to the future generation that will come after us and your grandchildren. I'm so inspired that I also played a role in challenging you to put some memoir around your struggle.
Royalties will be coming.
Yeah, so I'm so happy, so inspiring. And I'm very happy that Rachel from another generation and Dr. Oluga from another generation have picked up and have honored this to navigate this. What I can say is a quote I really love of one dissident like yourself called Milan Kundera. He said, the struggle of people against power is the struggle of memory against forgetting. This memory that you have documented here, I was just sharing with Ouma. His father in London gave us a small story how he recruited young patriot Kenyan called Irongo Houghton at age of 18 in the struggle for political prisoner in London. And we are with you here as a grandfather. What can we say? Is that we are honored, and I hope we'll take this forward. This is a tool for the social justice movement to continue with. You have handed over the stick, but don't rest.
There's another book still.
Another generation. Powerful. Long live.
Long live, brother. Let me take the last comment from there, unless there are any others behind you. Yeah, don't grab the mic. We are trying to protect you.
Yes, I just had one. So just one question. In regards to the last point you mentioned about the LGBTQ rights, yeah? So I mean, I think our president at one point in an interview with CNN, I remember he said that it was a non-issue, yeah? So I think in recent years, we've seen the Rwandan president saying something similar. We've seen the Ghanaian president saying something similar. So it seems to be that majority of the African presidents have more or less iterated the same thing. And you also seem to have a bit of cultural clash, yeah? So what I wanted to ask is, how do you reconcile those two things when if you look at like maybe the African continent as a whole, yeah? From the cultural aspect, it's something that's still, I could say maybe, seems to be a bit of a clash. And then you look at maybe a country like Kenya, which is predominantly religious, yeah? And you have, for example, people with religious convictions who believe that there's a bit of a clash there, yeah? So I wanted to ask, how do you reconcile those two? In terms of there's a cultural clash in some instances, and at the same time you also have maybe religious clashes there.
Okay, those are great questions and comments, I think. Let me invite, let's start with Oluga this time, whether he would like to pick up any of the issues that are raised. I mean, I think, you know, accountability is critical for unions and leadership. Any moment of leadership, any space of leadership is automatically a moment of accountability. How have you kept yourself accountable? How did you keep yourself accountable to the union? What were the structures that missing for people who want to take up leadership roles to, you know, what are the tips on leadership? Then we'll come to Rachel.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you again, Houghton, for this opportunity to discuss this. And I think this is related to the work we did on corruption in healthcare, and I think it's in page 92 about the stories of Alex Madaga and many other people who've lost their life. It's actually an accountability issue, and accountability for me is about if this doesn't affect me, then I will not act in the best interest of a society. And it cuts across whether you are a government official, whether you are a director in an NGO or a union. It's the fundamental thing about who do you represent, and do you represent them in their best interest, even when they are not watching and even when no one is watching. At that point, that's the real meaning of accountability in terms of what do you stand for. For me, I take it as a character issue, and there's this book that talks about the soul and character of a leader. And if you look at all the issues that we have around accountability, chapter 6 of the Constitution, integrity, chapter 10 in terms of public service and all these kind of things that we have put into law, it all boils down to the character of a human being. Would you make that decision as if it were you? And I have kept telling my colleagues at work, for example, that if you aren't the doctor that you would want to be when you are sick, then you shouldn't be one. But the point is that if you aren't the person that would be accountable to yourself, then you have no business leading anyone. The question is, why would someone be led by you? Why would someone entrust you to do anything for them? It's about accountability. It's about the trust that you act in their best interest. You act in the best interest of society, in the best interest of humanity, in the best interest of that profession, in the best interest of the NGOs. And yes, it is a big question in the civil society. And I would say this, and I think it has been said again. And sometimes we, people in the civil society, in unions, we lose the moral authority. So you want to hold government to a higher standard than you hold yourself. So I mean, who would listen to you? If it were me, I wouldn't listen to you. But you see, the moral authority, it's very, very high in terms of there is a moral authority, and I think some of my friend there again mentioned some of the unions. So you want to hold government to a democracy, but you don't practice it in your own organization. Decision making, you don't practice it that way. Public participation, do you practice it? So I think that moral integrity is also very important, and for me, it's a character issue. And it's, I think Houghton is aware because we've gone through several motions with him on this, especially when we were doing the work on corruption. The authority that we had, for example, to ask and to get senior people at that time, CECs, people in government, to answer our questions was not because they loved us, but because they know that the person asking this question is not just asking it for a purpose of a report or something. It's because there is some conviction to the impact or the negative impact of corruption in this. And you know, when we were doing the desktop research and the interviews, there is already moral integrity. And for me, I think that's how I would look at it in civil society. But it is something that we really need to discuss in civil society, in unions, in government. It's a society's issue in terms of the moral decadence, a lack of accountability. It's a problem everywhere. And it's something that we really have to work on. And it's about ourselves choosing to be the right people for the right jobs and for the society. And again, it begs the question, if you don't want to do it, who do you want to do it? But again, if you're doing it, are you doing it in your self-interest, or are you doing it in the best interest of the cause?
I'll try and make it short, but at the same time to attempt the three questions.
She's going to write a book now.
So, like, first, what you asked Laura in terms of also, for me, I see as personal accountability. Because sometimes when you look accountability, we are like others. But you as a person, what do you stand for? And if you feel that you haven't honored your word, even especially being in the movement, how do you take responsibility of that? Because also I think the question comes if taking the responsibility. Sometimes most of us will be like, we are good to be defensive and not saying I'm wrong. And I've not done the best way possible I would have done it. How can I make it better or correct it? So for me, I feel it's important when you have that sense of also like interrogating yourself on a personal level. Because the characteristic of leadership that might be in Olunga's might not be the same in me. So there's not this marking scheme. I'm having integrity, but at the same time, maybe I'm issues, which appears also something that I critique even within the civil society space, being there also. People will be good talking about governance, corruption, but how many are willing to talk about femicide? My comrades will talk about extrajudicial killings, but how many are willing to face the femicide issues, especially when it's linked to the politics around law versus morality? Because what is moral to you might not be moral to me. And if all of us want to look the issue of safety, it's a matter of the rule of law to be respected. The same way we are speaking as strong women, we are challenging the fact that within the patriarchy, we are not, quote unquote, as women are not supposed to speak, but us, we are like, we are supposed to speak at the equal right as men. So for me, I think it's something that we are good, but we need to improve, even as a movement. Because I've seen in cases even within the movement, we'll go, let's say, for example, right to water. Even within my community, everybody will be like, yes, yes, even the old men and everybody. Right to food, yes. But when you say gender equality, they're like, Even within the comrades, when you tell them LGBTQ right, they'll be like, yes, yeah, maana, tuanze kuongea mambo ya Article 43. You're like, there's no... Wacha
tuchukue chakula kwanza.
Tuchukue chakula kwanza tushibe na tuongee. For me, I don't believe that. I believe if you're an activist, there's no like a single struggle and the other one matters than the other one. All of them, it's kind of web, it's kind of interlinked. and all of us have to give the voice. And now it comes to the role of also allyship. Now when you ask about the boys, and also within the powers within the movement. Yes, I talk about health, but there's something in health that drives me so much. Maybe it has affected me. Let's say, for example, access to contraceptive or access to, let's say, research being done on endometriosis, and why is the government not taking issues of sexual reproductive health rights to be under NHIF? Why is cancer not being given a priority and people are dying of cancer? Now in COVID, why is government not investing more money? You see? So the point is that if you're talking also about patriarchy, I don't believe women we are ahead, because even me, but I'm struggling with patriarchy, imagine, at this age, the way people see me with domo, feminism, but I'm still fighting on daily basis. Within the family level, within the spaces I occupy, I'm still fighting people to see. First, you fight as a black woman. First, it goes back to, do you know how to speak English or not to speak English? How do you, explain yourself? Where are you coming from? Who are within your circle? So for me, I believe it's a lot of work, but I know if you are a good man, one of the feminist values is social justice. If you're a good man, there's no need of me attacking you. Nobody deserves to be attacked. But also it's the role of men to call out men who are oppressive. Men also who are violent to men. And that's why you'll see, even some of our program, it's important to invest on these kids. Treat them equally. You need to respect girls. Girls, you need to respect boys. And now do ensure those values are embedded, even from our small unit, the family. Even within our personal life. Not that I'm a feminist on podium, but in my private life, So talking about the president.
Non-issue.
That's very problematic. Because I know one of the African values, not hate, it's love. And the question of also, we have to be clear, is the rise of right-wing government also within the continent, and fundamentalism, is that the religious sector, I've invested a lot. And also I think that's where, I don't know if you have written about the power that sometimes, when it comes to power structures, or now religious sometimes even pump money to saying this one will get this vote, tunamsimamisha hii upande. Something that activists will need to learn on our religious, co-opt religious spaces. So most of the religious leaders have put money into our government. So they have put a lot of money, it means they'll determine and dictate the politics of a country. So it's up to us as African. It's like when people tell us feminists we are not Africans, I'm like, mimi si mzungu, mimi ni Mwafrika. It's the same way we need to challenge our presidents, because LGBTQ majority of the percentage of population, they are in this country, they're in this continent, and they exist. They're not ati watu wa kuangi, they exist, they are here. And it's not about seeing someone. It's nobody calls you heterosexual. Why would you call someone LGBTQ?
Actually, on that one, keep your thought. 2 years ago, I was in a meeting. I was invited, I was requested to open up the Amnesty offices for a meeting of LGBTIQ plus individuals and religious leaders. And I said, that one, can I even come and listen? So on a Friday afternoon, the door was opened, folks came in, there were about 60 people in the room, and in walked the Chief Justice Emeritus, Willie Mutunga, who has written the foreword. I didn't know he was coming. So I said, he's somebody we've known for a while. So I said, Willie, you're here? He said, yes. He says, I've also come. So we sat down, and for the first time in my life, I found myself lost for words on how to introduce myself. So how the meeting started, Rachel knows this very common experience. How the meeting started, my name is so-and-so and I'm gay. My name is so-and-so and I'm a lesbian. I'm so-and-so and I'm a transsexual. And then I was thinking, gosh, how am I going to introduce myself? Just think about it. As a heterosexual person, those of you who are, we never have to introduce our sexuality as part of our identity, We also don't do black and white because it's obvious, but that was the first time I was a sexual minority in a room, consciously, in as far as I know, consciously. And I think that's the thing that people need to get, is that actually, there will be times when we will be, we, the heterosexuals, will be sexual minorities, and we will have to think about what does that mean, and feel that sense of discomfort of being a minority for a change. Sorry.
Thank you, Irungu. So, to make the long story short, based on also Irungu contribution, also what you have asked, and Laura. If there are time women we are less in power, what is the role men are playing? So that when also us we are in power, we can play either a better role, you see, either a better role or excellent role. So that's what I believe. The same way if you are heterosexual, because this is the thing also, nobody is crooked. I'm not going to crooked. So the point that in whichever small way you occupy your space of power, just ensure like it's inclusive. If anybody comes in, they will feel safe, and they'll feel that their views of who they are respected and not being bashed. Because even me, I used to have this kind of problem. This one I have to confess. When we are on the other side of Uruewe, and when I say this, you know, Olal and the team, Islands, tunasemanga tu wale wababi ni watiaji. Wale wababi, and most of the babies when they come there, especially if you don't know Swahili, we'll be like, ay, ow. So when, for example, Rachel now comes to the other side of Wababi and then I find I'm a minority, how do I feel? I'll feel that, So the same way I'll feel bad, it's the same way like we ensure like all of us are able to contribute in one or another. That's why you'll see even me within my close circle of friends, I'm mixed up. Like, I don't care where you come from, as long as uko na ubuntu na utu, tusonge tukisonganga. So that's the most important thing I believe that, and also it's something that I'm learning as a person, how to put myself into meetings and trying to ask myself questions and trying to be a better person also.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, I think just to kind of close off on this particular topic, you know, Christian Della yesterday, day before yesterday, tweeted that he's running for Westlands constituency. And he tweeted a pro-LGBTI quote, right? And I began to think, wow, this society is moving. You know, and I think for the heterosexual community, or the heterosexual part of our nation, I think there's a growing acceptance that, you know, the phrase, it is a non-issue, means that all LGBTIQ plus individuals have a much right to the constitutional freedoms. As the protection of the Constitution, they have a right to health, they have a right to education, they have a right to free expression, they have the right to association, and that, you know, as Rachel said, does not exclude you on the basis of your sexual orientation or your sexual choices, right? That is a major milestone. Now, the whole society will not move together on this one. The whole society didn't move together on women's rights, right? The whole of society doesn't move together on mental health issues, right? So we have to continue to reason with each other, to talk to each other, and create safe spaces for these conversations to happen, which brings me very nicely to the comment or the question that was raised by Olal. Is it possible for dialogue and dissent to exist in a context where we see such inequalities, such injustice, such danger as a result of a pandemic? My argument to this fundamentally is yes. Let me speak to you, Olal, from a perspective you will understand. My vision of this country, actually all three things are in this book. My vision of this country is embedded in the Constitution. I don't think we need another ideological framework to work with, if I can use a word that we are both familiar with. Our aspiration as Kenyans is in the Constitution, right? It is in Chapter 4, it is in Chapter 6, and in Article 1, the idea that the people are sovereign. The strategy, and I want to read you the section that is on page 120. There are 4 primary lessons that we can draw from the experience of the activists that this book honors. The first is that the Kenyan state is the primary duty bearer for guaranteeing rights and freedoms. For that reason, I cannot be anti-state, right? I have to be pro-state, pro-a state that does as the Constitution obligates it to do. The second point is this one. As active citizens, as activists, our power does not arise from what we say or the opinions that we hold, but it is how we are listened to by the people around us. Now, I'll leave the other two because we'll get into meme country. But I think the important thing I wanted to mention here is that our activism has to have different approaches. Knowing that ultimately every transformation will end up in a conversation. You and I have been in the presence of a cabinet secretary. a principal secretary, the director of public prosecutions, the inspector general, I could go on, right? Not an ordinary space to be in. And we have named rogue officers who have routinely killed young men on suspicion alone, right? And we have named those names. I will never tire of going into those boardrooms and reminding government officers of the reason why they took their oath, which is to protect people, right? Now, perhaps dialogue and dissent combine in those moments, if you can see the line. But I think we have to continue to remind people who occupy our states that they went there for a purpose. And the way that I can do that is not just on the streets of Nairobi organizing demonstrations or protests. It is also walking into those spaces that are paid by taxpayers' monies to remind them why they are paid a salary, right? But I guess my objective in every moment is to win another ally for our cause, right? To turn people back to the Constitution and the power of the Constitution. And that's why when Oluga went to the Nairobi Metropolitan Services, I texted him very quickly to congratulate him. And I said, I will remind you of your father, right? I will now also dedicate some time to watch him and to remind him of the oath he took as a doctor, right? So if he gets into that space where, you know, those conversations can be a bit wild, huh? Those spaces can be a bit wild. And, you know, even things like, you know, roads get named after individuals, which we are a bit surprised about in Kileleshwa. I will remind him that he actually went there to serve chapter 43 without fear or favor. And the more that I can do that, the more that I hope people are okay in the back there. They don't need chapter 43 also. For those of you on Facebook and live streaming, we are getting Japanese interference from the restaurant next door. I hope you can still hear us. So my role with Oluga is to keep him true to his moral compass, right? I will never condemn him in public because I know where his heart is, right? He may need reminding from time to time. And actually, to be honest, all of us, we need reminding from time to time. So my request to you, Olal, Gasheke, all of you colleagues who really are at the front line of human rights defending in this country, is to remind Amnesty, first and foremost, why it exists, right? And to remind Irungu that that position of executive director is a privilege. Use it, right? Don't get comfortable on this side of town with the Barbies and what is the male version of Barbies? Mabombe. Okay, I think I've made my point. Listen, let me thank you very much for this session.
Can I
a closing remark from Oluga before I close us off.
Yes, thank you. I think I just want to close on the topic, dialogue and dissent. The two must coexist together, and I'll say it the way Barack Obama said it. Activism, advocacy gets you to the door. Once the door has been opened, you must dialogue. Dissent gets you to the door. The door will be opened. You must dialogue. And it's vice versa. Dialogue may fail and you may go back to dissent, but only for purposes of improving the dialogue or changing what is being discussed. But the two must coexist together. And therefore, thank you and congratulations, Irungu, for the wonderful book, Dialogue and Dissent.
Thank you very much. So we'll leave it there. This is the second of 4. We'll be back to talk about staying green with Paula Kahumbu and Phyllis Omido. Thank you, those of you who came this afternoon, those of you who are on the live stream and watching from there. Thank you very much for doing this. For those of you who bought the book, thank you. You don't only honor me and 5 years of thinking about this project, but you actually honor the people that I have written about in the book. And I thank you for that very much. We're going to close off with book signing, but before we go to the book signing, I would like you to just pay attention to this video that we're going to play to you. And it's really the trailer of something that was quite remarkable. And not only have we mentioned it with Dr. Oluga, but it is really the story of what happened to Alex Madaga and why Alex Madaga's name must be mentioned for many, many generations to come. So I'll invite the technical team to take us to the trailer. Once it's over, we can break off. I believe there are some eats and a few drinks. And then I promise to try and write as neatly in your book as possible so you are not annoyed. Thank you for coming.
I have a priority 1. Suspected head injury secondary to a high-speed hit and run. Unresponsive adult male, about 20 to 30. Might have traffic up ahead.
We need to know where you are. Okay, Esther, you have to slow down. Just take a deep breath. Now tell me, what happened?
So what do we have?
Pedestrian involved in a high-speed hit and run.
How long ago?
That's all we have.
My name is Zach from Raven Paramedics. Sir, I'm with the ambulance. We're here to help, okay? Raven Paramedics were expected.
We don't have an ICU bed.
What? We have a patient who's in dire need of emergency care.
Our 21 beds are fully occupied.
We need to get moving and get to a hospital with working doctors.
We need to sign off this patient to a hospital. Trust me, you don't want your name in the news with blood on your hands. How many lives do you think I've saved before?
Do you count? I don't know.
Exactly my point. Many.
Kwani Mungu ako wapi? I don't want his will to be done. Kama hiyo will ina take away what matters to me.
I am not giving up.
And I am not asking you to.
You can treat my husband. That is the least you can do.
I'm a paramedic. I know my job. No entry on the left side.
He has internal bleeding on the left side of his brain.
Say something!
8, 9, 10.
Clear!
Long live Alex Madaga. Long live. Thank you for coming.
2, 2, 2, 2, 2.